Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Although it's ongoing, we know that people like Greta Thunberg has said that COP26 is a failure. I want to know if our guests agree, and I want to get your sense of where things are about a little over a week into COP26. We'll start with Herbert, who I believe is just back from Glasgow.
Thank you very much, John. That's a great question, and thanks very much to the organisers for this invitation. I think my response to that would first of all be to give some consoling words to Greta, and sort of tell her not to be a little bit more patient. We have a week to go. Today's Adaptation Day. I would ask her not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, we have to realize that it is quite difficult to host a summit during a pandemic, and, you know, in many respects, progress really has been made. I mean, we're seeing public acceptance of climate change has never been higher. You know, 100 countries have signed up to deforestation by 2030. 45 countries have signed up to the Sustainable Farming Initiative. There's the reduction in walking away from coal investments overseas, although personally I would like to see the running towards renewable investments rather than the walking away from the coal investments. And I think an unprecedented participation of private capital, global pools of capital took place last Wednesday. We all took part in that great meeting during the finance track, where commitments at an unprecedented level were made. In excess of $130 trillion were committed to net zero. I mean, that's essentially 5 times the size of the US economy. You know, we now know that, and I won't steal Eric's thunder, but the UN is setting up a net zero panel for non-state actors, and of course business is going to be playing a major role. So if you sort of combine that and you look at just the commitments from last week, according to the IEA, you know, those pledges, if met, you know, really still keep us under a sort of 2-degree scenario, and we have the rest of this week to go. However, on the not so good side, and perhaps where I might sort of align a little bit more with Greta, or at least sort of understand her frustration, are the broken promises around, you know, the trust deficit that's sort of being created around the just transition, adaptation and mitigation finance pledges, which are, for example, for my continent, asking Africa, which represents 3 to 4% of cumulative global CO2 emissions, to forego the development of our $15.2 trillion of proven fossil fuel reserves and resource endowment in return for a share of the not delivered $100 billion per annum high vintage adaptation and mitigation finance promise. So certainly, you know, Greta may have a point there. Trust does need to be restored. And the private sector in particular should be on guard, because the conversations that were taking place last week in Glasgow demonstrate that there seems to be a shifting of that sort of political responsibility and commitment around the, you know, the 100 billion per annum, which UNCTAD says should really be closer to 300 billion to 500 billion a year, being shifted to the private sector. But in closing, I think the good news overall is that private capital is now firmly at the table. And interestingly, I think based on the conversations from last week in Glasgow, we're actually at the forefront of pushing governments to take out that political duration and currency risk away, so that we can, you know, have our capital enabled to provide some real support and take advantage of some of these financing opportunities to support the transition, especially to emerging markets and developing countries.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.